Very excited to be talking today about how to include people with environmental sensitivities in disaster and emergency preparedness, especially during the COVID pandemic. And what we mean by environmental sensitivities, which also can be known as environmental intolerance, includes those who have chemical sensitivities, sensitivities to electromagnetic fields, which can be abbreviated EMF, mold sensitivities, and sensory sensitivities, where someone can react to light, sound, noise, and vibration. And somebody can have one or more of any combination of these environmental sensitivities. I'm going to focus my talk on chemical sensitivities. I will say a little about EMF sensitivities, but Susie Malloy will cover this in more detail later. I'm going to give some basic information about chemical and EMF sensitivities, talk about barriers and issues related to emergency services, provide some tips for first responders, and cover some issues related to COVID. Much of the basic information I'm going to present is in the aforementioned introductory booklet on multiple chemical sensitivities. And we also have a New Mexico MCS brochure. And both of these items and other information is available on my website that was mentioned earlier. So what are chemical sensitivities? I mean, chemical sensitivities is a medical condition where someone becomes ill from exposures to small amounts of chemicals. And many of these are found in everyday life. So some of the problem substances are pesticides, which include bug sprays and weed killers, perfumes, cologne, and other scented products of all sorts, including what's called air fresheners, smoke of all kinds, cigarettes, fires, new paint and building materials, new carpets, glues, solvents, gasoline, asphalt, vehicle exhaust, natural gas and propane, and many, if not most, cleaning and laundry products, and many, if not most, disinfectants and sanitizers. And if this seems like a long list, it is. It is very challenging to live one's life and try to avoid all these things. Some people have only mild sensitivities. They might just need to stay away from a certain kind of perfume, for example, while others react more severely to a wider range of substances, and this is what we usually call the multiple chemical sensitivities, or MCS. And common symptoms when exposed to these chemicals include headache, trouble concentrating, nausea, diarrhea, fatigue, muscle and joint pain, dizziness, irregular heartbeat, difficulty breathing, and even seizures. And sometimes after chemical exposures, altered brain chemistry can cause a chemically sensitive person to burst into tears, get angry, or be very anxious. People with MCS often also react to a variety of foods. We often eat a limited diet or organic food, cannot drink tap water, need bottled water. Sometimes this must be in glass bottles. And many also have intolerances to medications, where there's some people that can't take any medications or only a few. And sometimes they must be compounded without dyes and fillers to be tolerated. Symptoms and ill health can occur after inhaling, breathing in, touching, or ingesting substances. So what MCS is not is a smell problem. Some people with chemical sensitivities lose their sense of smell, but they still get ill if they're in a room full of perfume. They just lose their ability to detect it. And who gets chemical sensitivities? Well, chemical sensitivities occurs in people of all ages, races, and economic backgrounds. Women are more affected than men in a 2-to-1 ratio. The latest prevalence study published in 2018 showed that 1/4 of the US population now say they get sick from exposures to everyday chemicals. The prevalence of those with the more severe form of chemical sensitivities, MCS, is probably about 6%. So one thing to notice is that it is extremely likely that first responders, the Red Cross, and other agencies involved in disasters and emergencies are going to encounter chemically sensitive individuals. As far as electromagnetic sensitivity, and this is sometimes known as electromagnetic hypersensitivity, or EHS, sometimes these are hard to keep track of, can become ill when exposed to cell phones, cell towers, computers, wireless utility meters, fluorescent lights, battery rechargers, electrical appliances, and security equipment. And with the ever-increasing amount of electro pollution, it is just getting harder and harder to avoid these exposures. Common symptoms when exposed to these sources of electromagnetic fields include, but are certainly not limited to, headache, insomnia, burning skin, body pain, and shakiness. It is estimated that 3 to 5% of the population may suffer from EHS. Well, what is the mechanism of chemical sensitization? You know, what's going on? What causes this? And no one knows for sure, but it does seem to involve the central nervous system and the immune system. The most consistent abnormal physiologic finding in people with MCS and EHS is elevated inflammatory markers in the blood. And this is not found in normal controls and those who have traditional allergies. And last year, a very interesting study was published that looks at genes that promote pro-inflammatory states and found that those with MCS were indeed more likely to carry these genes. Functional brain scans that look at how the brain is doing are also often abnormal in those with chemical and electromagnetic sensitivities. Treatment for both MCS and EHS is primarily avoiding those substances and electromagnetic waves that cause symptoms. Although some improvement is possible, few recover entirely from these conditions, and so they are typically lifelong chronic disabilities. As far as disability status, MCS is acknowledged as a potential disabling condition by the Social Security Administration, HUD, and the Federal Access Board. It's covered under the ADA on a case-by-case basis. And people with MCS usually have no trouble meeting the criteria of having substantial limitations in at least one life activity. MCS usually affects every aspect of a person's life, including whether and where they can work, their relationships, where they can go, what they can do, what they can eat, who they can be around, what products to use. And despite some recognition of MCS, those with this disability continue to suffer a profound lack of access to housing, employment, and healthcare, and much of the rest of the built environment. Housing is the biggest problem. Even during normal times, finding safe housing is a formidable task. Many end up living in cars, yards, and campgrounds because they can't find safe indoor housing. So finding safe shelter during emergencies and disasters is an even more daunting challenge, but one that Cindy Norwitz will be addressing, and she's the next speaker. Some of my first work on emergency preparedness for people with chemical sensitivities occurred in 1996. The New Mexico State Disability Agency hosted a town hall meeting on MCS to explore problems of people with chemical sensitivities. We had chemically sensitive people testify in front of representatives from various state agencies. One staff member who was attending was chief of the Emergency Medical Services, the EMS Bureau. He was shocked to find that chemically sensitive people were extremely hesitant to use emergency services. He wrote about his experience and wrote an article that was published in the state EMS newsletter. And in the article, he states, Several folks in a row shared experiences in having to call 911 and encountering EMTs, emergency medical techs, who smelled of cologne or cigarette smoke, or who were not responsive to their concerns about vehicle exhaust fumes, plastic in the oxygen mask, etc. They spoke of actually being afraid of having to call EMS and risk being taken to a hospital where they might be assaulted by toxic chemical fumes and sometimes unwanted treatments that might actually worsen their condition. The vehemence of their concern caught me by surprise. All I could think to say was that you always have the right to refuse care or transport. One woman said, well, that was good in theory, but when she was scared, in pain, and perhaps disoriented, she found it impossible to counteract the decisive nature of EMT's desire to put her in the ambulance and follow their protocols. Some of these people were indeed scared to death of calling 911. But to address these issues, the MCS task force then worked with the state emergency service staff to develop some basic principles for dealing with those with chemical sensitivities and develop tips for emergency responders. One kind of fun aspect of that project was that a few of us were allowed to sit inside and inspect an ambulance and ask questions. And when we were sitting in the ambulance with the engine off, we were pleasantly surprised that the ambulance was pretty inert. Didn't smell like new car with vinyl and fabric. It was mainly just stainless steel. We found out, one of the things we found out was that if someone had a portable air filter that they'd used in their car, that it could be plugged into the DC outlet in the ambulance. And that in almost all cases, it was not necessary to idle the ambulance. So the three basic principles of interacting with chemically sensitive individuals I'm going to tell you about. We didn't address EMF at that time, but these principles can be applied to that as well. Number one is listen to the person and believe. If someone says they are chemically or EMF sensitive, they can react to substances or electromagnetic fields at levels that a responder does not detect or might even consider benign. Number two, communicate. Assure the person that you understand he or she has chemical or EMF sensitivities and will work with them in providing care. Discuss options. We are all different. Accommodations that work for another chemically or EMF sensitive person may not work for the next person. It's very important to work together to find solutions that are appropriate for each person. And number three, let environmentally sensitive people use as much of their own stuff as possible. So this starts with their house. If it's possible to shelter in place and not go somewhere else, that would be the preference. If transportation is needed, let them use their own car. And if they are having to evacuate somewhere else, have them take their own clothes and masks, food, water, supplements, medications, soap, air filters, oxygen tubing, EMF protective gear, etc. These are products that have usually been carefully chosen to be tolerable for that person, and substitutes are often not tolerated. So a few more pointers. Well, just to go over again, unless there is a compelling reason, do not idle ambulance or other emergency vehicles. Exhaust is very toxic to chemically sensitive people and really to everyone. And diesel exhaust is the worst. Provide non-smoking personnel who are not wearing perfume or cologne, if at all possible. Turn off cell phones if asked. Be aware that some chemically sensitive people lose their ability to speak when they are being exposed to chemicals. And if you see that happening, try to take them to cleaner air. Cleaner air is usually outside, is better than indoors, but not if there's heavy smoke or chemical spill outside. Before using latex gloves, disinfectants, cleaners, or other sprays or products near a chemically sensitive person, ask if it's okay. That person may need to go to another location. When out in the world, many chemically sensitive people wear masks to filter out pollutants. If you're having trouble hearing a person with a mask, don't ask them to take their mask off. Reduce noise in the area or go to a less noisy area. So a word about masks worn by chemically sensitive individuals. Usually we're trying to filter out perfume, pesticides, could be mold, anything else. And some wear kind of cotton masks. Some have charcoal inserts. The charcoal absorbs some of the VOCs, so that's better. Others use full-on industrial respirators like this. And the cartridges usually are to filter VOCs. You can also get them to filter particulate matter. And so essentially they are equivalent, thank you, they are equivalent to N95 masks for COVID. One thing to notice though, that to be COVID compliant, the exhale valve, like I have covered with material so that I'm protecting other people as well as protecting myself when I'm wearing this. So, okay, I want to finish up with a few words about COVID. The two main things that affect chemically sensitive people are the increased use of more toxic sanitizers and disinfectants that are now being used, and also the issue of vaccination. So many places, sadly, many places that were previously accessible no longer are because of all the disinfectants being used. I was contacted by 2 teachers last summer who had taught for years and years and now had to quit teaching because they could no longer go to their schools, be there in person. Chemically sensitive people generally do not tolerate bleach, rubbing alcohol, phenol, and ammonia that are common ingredients in disinfecting products. I believe Cindy is going to be going over some safer recommendations for disinfection. And vaccines, well, many people with MCS are extremely drug intolerant. Like I said, can't take any medications or can't take any vaccines, although this is not true for everyone. But for certain individuals, the risk of the vaccine can be greater than the risk of catching COVID. And those with medical contraindications to receiving the COVID vaccine should not be discriminated against. In many cases, a reasonable alternative to being vaccinated is to test negative on a rapid COVID test before admission to, say, a shelter or mode of transportation. So the take-home message is that environmental sensitivities are serious, disabling, chronic conditions that affect a significant portion of the population. Those involved in emergency and disaster services are very likely to run into people with these disabilities. For the most successful outcomes when interacting with someone with environmental sensitivities, it is key to listen and believe the person, communicate about options for accommodations, and whenever possible, allow the person to use his or her own home, car, and other supplies. Thank you for your interest in this important topic.